If you want to understand the chaos in our world, don't look to the future. Look at who controls it. A tiny, privileged group of older elites shapes the system purely for their own gain. They defend it like it's their personal property. This isn't about experience or wisdom. It's about power that refuses to let go. While most of society pays the price, they maintain an order that breeds crises, inequality, and stagnation. They decide who wins, who loses, and who struggles just to survive. Every rule, every policy, every system is bent to protect their comfort and influence. The question is simple and terrifying. How long will they hold the reins? Let me start with the story of a 17-year-old boy who walked into a small dance studio in a quiet British town, carrying a knife and a level of violence no one inside could have imagined. Inside that studio were children, 5, 6, 7 years old, practicing dance in what should have been one of the safest places in their lives. Within minutes, the boy attacked them, killing 3 children and turning an ordinary afternoon into a national trauma. Police arrived quickly, arresting him on the spot, and everything about him suggested deep psychological disturbance and instability. The court acted fast, sentencing him to 52 years in prison, a punishment that effectively meant he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. At that point, it seemed like justice had been delivered, and the story should have ended there. Within days, rumors began spreading online across Britain, moving faster than facts and fueled by fear and anger. People claimed the attacker was an asylum seeker, an immigrant, and proof that immigration had spiraled out of control. Those rumors ignited protests that quickly turned violent, spreading from city to city across the country. Cars were set on fire, streets were blocked, and clashes erupted between protesters and police forces. Immigrant neighborhoods became targets, blamed collectively for an act committed by a single individual. During that summer, parts of Britain quite literally burned as public order collapsed under collective rage. What made this even more disturbing was the fact that the central claim driving the violence was false. The boy was not an immigrant, but a British citizen born in Wales to parents originally from Rwanda. By the time the truth became widely known, it no longer mattered because the emotional damage had already been done. The men participating in the riots did not look ashamed or regretful, but convinced they were doing the right thing. They felt righteous, virtuous, and proud, believing they were defending their country from an external threat. This raises a deeper question about why immigration has become such a powerful trigger for civil conflict across the Western world. Britain is only one example of a much larger global pattern that keeps repeating itself. In the United States, immigration became one of the decisive issues shaping political outcomes, including the election of Donald Trump. Across Western countries, immigration has not increased gradually, but surged rapidly within a short period of time. After the COVID era, immigration numbers spiked dramatically, overwhelming systems that were never designed for such speed. At the same time, the majority of new immigrants began arriving from regions far outside Europe, including the Middle East, Africa, and East Asia. For many local populations, this did not feel like gradual cultural change, but like sudden transformation. Where immigration once meant Europeans moving within Europe, it now meant entirely different languages, religions, and social norms arriving at once. In Britain, demographic changes have become stark and visible, no longer abstract statistics but lived daily experiences. In some areas, immigrant populations have tripled within a single decade, reshaping entire neighborhoods. Walking through certain parts of the country can feel unfamiliar to longtime residents, as if they are no longer in the place they grew up in. To many, it feels less like adaptation and more like displacement. And Britain is not alone in this experience. Australia has seen a massive post-COVID immigration surge, primarily driven by arrivals from India, China, and the Philippines. France is undergoing similar changes, with large inflows from Africa and the Middle East reshaping cultural identity. Germany, Italy, and other Western European nations are facing the same pressures at the same time. Everywhere, the same fear quietly takes hold, that society is changing faster than people can emotionally or economically absorb. When that fear combines with rising living costs and economic insecurity, it rarely stays peaceful for long. Instead, it turns into anger, polarization, and eventually open conflict, At the same time that immigration is increasing, another pressure is quietly building beneath the surface of everyday life, and that pressure is inflation. Inflation is measured through something called the Consumer Price Index, which tracks the rising cost of basic necessities like food, rent, and shelter. Over the past few years, this index has surged upward, reflecting a sharp increase in the cost of simply surviving. As prices rise and new immigrants arrive, many people feel their quality of life steadily slipping away. Rent consumes a larger share of income, groceries cost more each month, and supporting a family becomes increasingly difficult. The most dramatic increase appears in housing prices, which have surged far faster than wages. In Canada, the last 5 years brought a massive influx of immigrants alongside a housing market that completely lost touch with reality. Home prices skyrocketed at a pace that made ownership impossible for most young people. In contrast, the United States, with a much larger economy, saw relatively stable housing prices where income and home values still roughly align. A young person in the United States can still realistically imagine buying a home, while in Canada, that dream has largely vanished. In Canada, housing prices have detached from income levels entirely, creating a market that no longer makes economic sense. Gross domestic product grows modestly, while housing prices explode upward, breaking the connection between work and ownership. As a result, many Canadians feel the national promise of owning a home has quietly died. What makes this situation even stranger is that as immigration increases and prices rise, housing construction barely changes at all. One would expect governments to build more homes, yet housing supply remains almost flat despite surging demand. With limited supply and rising demand, competition intensifies, pushing prices even higher. This dynamic benefits those who already own property, especially homeowners and real estate investors. Policy decisions increasingly reflect the interests of those who profit from rising prices, rather than the needs of the broader population. Developers, landlords, and property owners gain wealth as scarcity drives values upward. If supply remains constant while demand grows, basic economics ensures that housing prices inflate artificially. That artificial inflation enriches homeowners while locking younger generations out of ownership. This imbalance helps explain why Canada faces such an acute housing crisis. Alongside housing pressure, another demographic shift is unfolding quietly but steadily. As immigration rises, native-born populations in many Western countries are having fewer children. In Canada, birth rates decline year after year, while immigration becomes the primary source of population growth. Today, roughly 1/4 of all Canadians are first-generation immigrants. If current trends continue for several decades, the demographic makeup of the country will change dramatically. These rapid shifts generate deep social tension and uncertainty about the future. Despite rising housing costs, inflation, and growing ethnic friction, the Canadian government continues to expand immigration targets. There is no meaningful pause, slowdown, or reassessment of policy direction. Instead, immigration goals are set to increase even further. Canada's population currently sits around 40 million, yet official plans envision 100 million people by the year 2100. The majority of that future population growth is expected to come from India and China. Across Western nations, the immigrant share of total population continues to rise sharply. In Australia, immigrants now make up nearly 1/3 of the population. In Canada, the figure stands at roughly 1/4. In Germany, it approaches 1/5. These proportions continue climbing, fueling political tension and social unrest. Among new arrivals, immigrants from India now far exceed those from any other country. These figures include only legal immigrants and exclude millions of international students. If immigration appears to worsen life for immigrants and locals alike, especially for young people, why does the system continue? That question sits at the center of everything that follows. About 10 years ago, Canada quietly introduced a policy called Medical Assistance in Dying, known as MAID. The idea behind MAID is simple and disturbing. If life feels meaningless, if depression feels unbearable, or if illness seems impossible to cure, the government will help you die. What makes this shocking is that only a few decades ago, assisting suicide was considered a serious crime. Helping someone end their life was treated as murder, punishable by prison. Today, the same act is rebranded as compassion when it is administered by the state. The question is obvious. What is the real difference between suicide and the government helping you kill yourself? In practice, there is no difference at all. Yet the government insists that one is immoral and the other is ethical. Official brochures explain why suicide is bad, while state-assisted death is presented as responsible and humane. The message is clear. Dying alone is wrong, but dying with government approval is acceptable. According to this logic, suicide is tragic because it shocks family and friends. But if the state organizes your death, everyone has time to prepare, so the loss feels more manageable. Another justification claims that individuals might fail if they try to kill themselves alone. When professionals handle it, the process becomes efficient, clean, and reliable. What this reveals is not compassion, but extreme bureaucratic thinking applied to human life. Even death becomes regulated, optimized, and processed through paperwork. The numbers tell the story clearly. In 2016, Canada recorded roughly 1,000 deaths through euthanasia. By 2021, that number had surged to over 10,000. The growth is not slow or gradual, but rapid and accelerating. Approval timelines reveal how quickly the system now moves. In places like Oregon, the process can still take weeks. In Canada, approval can come in as little as 10 days. Doctors who were once trained to preserve life are now trained to facilitate death. What was meant to be the last possible option has quietly become the first. Approval rates continue to rise year after year. What once required strict evaluation now passes with minimal resistance. The percentage of deaths caused by euthanasia is climbing across the Western world, but nowhere does it rise as sharply as in Canada. Canada now leads in speed and scale. The system appears designed not to slow death, but to normalize it. So, who exactly is dying? The largest group consists of people suffering from cancer. Cancer is among the most expensive conditions to treat. Many forms of cancer are painful, but not immediately terminal. This raises an uncomfortable implication. People with costly illnesses may be encouraged to die because they strain the system. The pattern becomes clearer when income is considered. The most disturbing detail lies in the reasons officially given for approval. The leading cause is loss of ability to enjoy meaningful activities. In other words, unhappiness becomes grounds for death. Another major reason is difficulty performing daily tasks. Struggling to shop, walk, or live independently becomes justification for dying. This system does not eliminate suffering. It eliminates the people who suffer. 25 years ago, euthanasia was rejected even for patients in extreme agony. Society believed that every life had inherent value. Protecting the poor, the weak, and the vulnerable was seen as a moral duty. That belief created social trust and cohesion. Today, those values have been replaced by calculations. Life is measured in cost, efficiency, and financial burden. Morality gives way to spreadsheets. This same logic appears elsewhere in society. Financial markets surge while real economies stagnate. Wealth concentrates at the top while productivity declines. The financial economy grows disconnected from real work and real lives. Stock prices soar even as living standards fall. Governments respond not by solving problems, but by denying them. Economic decline is rebranded as transition. Public frustration is dismissed as misunderstanding. Debt expands without restraint. For most of American history, government debt remained low. Today it exceeds $37 trillion. Households drown in mortgages and credit card debt they will never repay. The middle class erodes quietly. Birth rates collapse as young people lose faith in the future. Why bring children into a world that feels broken? Meanwhile, national assets are sold to foreign investors. Countries lose ownership of their own resources. What remains is a pattern: rising property prices, inflation and declining quality of life, soaring stock markets and widening inequality, falling real productivity, state-assisted death for the poor, mass immigration and demographic replacement, lower birth rates, exploding public and private debt, bureaucratic gaslighting, and the stripping away of national assets. These are not isolated issues. They are symptoms of a deeper systemic decline, and they are unfolding across the Western world. The question is simple but unsettling. Why is all of this happening at the same time? Many theories attempt to explain the chaos we see around us. Some of these theories overlap, while others directly contradict each other. A few sound extreme, but others feel disturbingly reasonable. One popular explanation is neoliberalism, the belief that economic growth solves every problem. According to this view, if numbers rise, happiness will naturally follow. Another explanation is techno-feudalism. Massive corporations, especially tech giants, aim for total control. If people own nothing, no homes, no land, no assets, they become easy to manage. Dependency replaces freedom, and compliance becomes a necessity. A third theory points to global governance. Institutions like the United Nations are said to weaken national sovereignty. The goal is a unified world system where local governments have minimal power. Then there is population replacement theory, which claims that some governments target native populations. People who value free speech, democracy, and rights ask too many questions. The theory suggests replacing them with more compliant populations makes governance easier. Immigrants from disciplined societies are seen as less resistant to authority. Another explanation is bureaucratic incompetence. Governments simply fail to understand complex systems. Policies are made blindly, mistakes compound, and problems accelerate over time. In the end, a simpler question can reveal the pattern. Who benefits from all of this? When housing prices rise and stock markets soar, certain people gain wealth while ordinary workers struggle. Looking at these trends together, the main beneficiaries become clear. Wealthy pensioners. They often own multiple homes, and rising property values increase their wealth effortlessly. They control the majority of stocks, profiting without working. Social systems also work in their favor, giving them faster access to medical services. Mass immigration provides cheap labor for jobs that younger generations refuse to do. Economic shocks, inflation, and debt barely affect them. They are retired, financially secure, and largely insulated from societal pressures. The system gradually aligns with their interests, not through conspiracy, but through natural incentives. Policies drift toward those who vote, own, and assert their influence, often sacrificing the future for the comfort of the present. Some trends clearly benefit wealthy pensioners, while most other changes barely touch them. For analysis, we can assume they are the main drivers of the system. Never in human history have so many old and wealthy people existed at the same time. In the past, those over 75 were rare and barely influenced society. Today, the population over 60 is exploding, creating unprecedented structural challenges. As people age, they accumulate resources, which intensifies inequality. Not all elderly people are rich, but statistically, wealth is concentrated among older age groups. There are rich young people, but far more rich old people, and far more old people than ever before. The real issue is wealthy old age, and these individuals depend heavily on pension systems. Pension systems were built on faulty assumptions, mainly that people would die early. Retirement was set at 65, with life expectancy around 72. Pensions were meant for only a few years, a model that no longer works. People are living decades longer than expected, creating massive pension liabilities. These liabilities grow larger every year, and pension funds face enormous shortfalls. Volatile markets and flawed assumptions about smooth growth destroy long-term models. Pension funds suffer the most, often exploited by investment banks and smart financial players. Returns fluctuate, instability destroys models, and for young people, the implications are grim. By the time they retire, the money may be gone, as there are too many retirees and not enough workers. Pensioners now outnumber workers in many countries, guaranteeing the collapse of the system. Old people continue to live longer, increasingly dominating society and political power structures. This leads to gerontocracy, where political leadership reflects the will of the elderly. Presidents, senators, and lawmakers remain in office into their 80s and 90s, surrendering power only through death. Institutions become frozen, leadership fragile, and society reactionary. Young people want change, middle-aged people want stability, and the elderly want nothing to change. Safety becomes the highest priority, creativity disappears, and openness is replaced by stubbornness. This explains lockdowns, surveillance, police expansion, and the regulation of personal life. Digital currencies replace cash, technology moves closer to the body, and mass immigration fills labor shortages. Prisons expand, fear drives incarceration, wars continue, and elderly leaders send young people to die. Modern medicine prolongs life far beyond natural limits, even without consciousness, while one elderly cohort replaces another. Power never truly transfers. Old replaces old, and the cycle continues. A future shaped not by youth, but by those who refuse to let go.